This is Betsy Jensen, and you are listening to Unstoppable Body and Mind, episode 82, Parenting and Pain, an interview with Crystal. In this podcast, we learn to upgrade our brain and understand the power of our thoughts, to heal and to create the results we want in our life. Become the person in control of your healing and make peace with your life. Become unstoppable, body and mind. Hello, my loves. I have a special interview with Crystal, who's a parenting coach today. She helps overwhelmed parents learn to regulate their emotions and connect with their children. She interviewed me for her podcast, and as I learned more about her parenting style and what she coaches on, it sounded so similar to what I teach with emotional regulation and understanding your thoughts and feelings with pain. So I think you'll find this interesting, whether you're a parent or not. So we'll jump right in. Here's the interview. All right. So today on the podcast, we have Crystal, who is a coach for parents and especially parents who are overwhelmed, and teaches a really interesting parenting style, which I feel like really relates to what I teach here on the podcast. And will be interesting for parents, but also not only just for parents, this podcast. You can listen for the relationship between the parent and child. And since a lot of us are doing our own inner child work, it might be interesting as she describes parenting. But anyway, welcome, Crystal.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I think that you don't have to be a parent, because my whole mantra is like, as you heal yourself from the inside out, then you heal your parent-child relationship. So even if you don't have kids and you're listening to this, all of these things can apply to you as well, because it really is your own inner work that you do that heals all relationships, right? With your neighbors and your friends and employees and family and all of those things. So yeah, I think it's helpful for everyone.
Yes. Okay. That was perfectly explained. So you have 4 kids of your own, and I'm super impressed because you've been homeschooling them for 4 years.
10 years.
Oh, 10 years? Oh,
yes.
okay.
Yeah. My oldest is in grade 10. So it has been, it's been long. I've been doing it for a long time.
Yeah. With 4 kids. And then now you're traveling as well, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, we are. We just started traveling because I've always thought it would be super cool to homeschool and travel.
Wow. Okay. So amazing. So you are really living it. You are really right in the thick of it. What are the ages of your kids?
So my oldest is 15. I have 3 boys and a girl. So I have a 15, 12, and 8-year-old boys that are fun and crazy and so wild. My 15-year-old is less wild now, but my little ones are very wild. And then I have a 5-year-old girl.
So cool. And I have 3 boys and a girl too, just like that.
Oh, that is awesome. I actually love it.
They're just all teenagers. Yeah, it's a fun mix. So what kind of parenting is it that you teach? And can you describe more about how you came to this?
Yes, for sure. So I call it radical connection. You're going to probably hear some buzzwords of like positive parenting or attachment-based parenting or intentional parenting. And everybody probably explains them a little bit differently. I mean, maybe, I don't know.
Parenting, that's the
conscious parenting. Yeah. Yeah. That's another one. Gentle parenting, respectful parenting. I call it radical connection because the way that I view it is it's really connection and relationship over behavior modification. So instead of us being like, we want to mold and shape our kids to be these people that just listen to us and sit still and, don't talk back and all those things, it's really focusing on that relationship and connection. And as we have that secure attachment with them, they are more likely to obey us and listen to us and model our behavior. And so that's kind of what this parenting style approach is. So instead of using rewards and punishments and that kind of a discipline to get your kids to do what you want, you work on the relationship instead so that they naturally do what you want them to do. And obviously they're not going to do it all of the time, but really it's letting them have the space to be their own people, like to grow up to be who they are.
Yeah.
So I love it. And I've coached so many people on it. And what the difference that I do is like, I combine life coaching tools, mindset work, emotion work, inner work, with this form of parenting, because what I found in my personal life was like my parents did not parent this way. They were very authoritarian. But when my son, who's 15 now, was about 2, they gave me this book from Gordon Neufeld called Hold On to Your Kids. And they were like, you need to read this book. We parented wrong. This is the right way.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. So I read it and I was like, oh, wow, this is the right way. And at that time I was very like angry, timeout, yelling, like all those kinds of, go-to parenting techniques that's the only way I knew. And that's the way that I did it. I hated it and I didn't feel good about it, but I didn't know that there was another way. So I was introduced to this other way of parenting, read all these books. I even went to courses like in person with the author. I've like just, I spent like a decade doing all these things. But it didn't help because I felt like it was so hard to actually do. I was like, I need one of these experts to be in my house telling me what to do all the time in order for me to actually parent this way.
Yes.
And then I had a neurodivergent child. I have a couple of them who was diagnosed with a few things, and traditional parenting techniques do not work on him at all. As do a lot of my clients have kids with ASD or ADHD, and you'll find that you are butting heads with them all of the time. And no matter what you do, it is not going to work. And so I just knew that I needed to switch my parenting. And at that point, we kind of came to like a ultimatum. I was like, I don't even know how to handle this anymore. Like I was at like the lowest of lows in my parenting journey. And it wasn't until I really started to shift my expectation and start working on myself that I was like starting to see these little changes. And when I found life coaching, I was like, oh, like these are the tools that are missing in this parenting sphere. Like nobody's talking about these tools. And at least that I know of. I don't know anybody that's merging these two. And I'm like, this is literally the answer. Like this bridges the gap between the kind of parenting that we want to do and who we are kind of naturally and intentionally. So that's what I help parents with now. And I've totally changed my relationship with my son. And his meltdowns used to be very like extraordinarily extreme, like bad. And I didn't even know if we would be able to like live in the same house, because I'm like, this is getting really intense. And I've had clients like that too, who had teenagers that did end up in the hospital or in outpatient because it just got so severe. And as soon as I started to switch my reaction, my response, my parenting, our relationship started to change and shift. And over the course of, several years, it's completely changed. And he still has like little small triggers that will trigger him, but it's very, I would say it's 80 to 90% less intense and probably 95% or more less frequent. His behavior is completely different. And now that I have another child going through the same kind of issues, now that I know what to do, it doesn't make it easier. It's still like such hard work. It really is working on me and, my response and my reaction that has really helped go through this new parent-child dynamic with another kid going through the same struggles. So what I do now is kind of combine these two tools to help people heal that relationship. And we just often think our kids are the problem, right? We're like, they need a therapist, they need medication, they need the support, right? When really it's our response to them and our relationship with them. I was interviewed by this lady on YouTube, and this has happened so many times where I coach somebody. So she said, it'll be more helpful for you to explain how this works if you just coach me. So I coach her through this issue where she's talking about her tween and the struggles that they were going through. And I helped her kind of process what happened there and then get into like a different energy. And I was like, okay, now from where you're feeling now, let's go back to that experience and you tell me how you would have responded. And she, went through 1, 2, 3, 4. These are the things I would have done. And they are literally all the things from the books and the courses that I've been to that she hasn't. She doesn't know anything about this parenting. And I see this every single time that I coach. Like nobody needs to know. Nobody needs to read all the books. I mean, I still think they're lovely and explain things so well, but we don't need the books because we are our own parenting expert. We all have that intuition.
If we tune in, right?
Yes.
Because that I resonate so much from the like before picture of the parent, being so stressed out, especially when my kids were young, and really thinking like, my parenting is reflected in their behavior. And so there was this tension and this like combative, relationship sometimes. And I didn't feel good. I hated that. So I heard of conscious parenting and I really resonated with that. And it felt so much
Mhm.
better to me. And
Yeah.
it makes sense from, what we teach about tuning into the body with pain is the more you tune into your body and how you're feeling and accessing your inner wisdom, sounds like
Mhm.
this is going to help you with your parenting
Yes,
as
it
well.
exactly is. It's like everybody has an inner expert, an inner life expert, right? And
Yes.
if we can like tap through all of the garbage happening in our brain and tap into
Yes.
that, like that, it always has the answers. And the way you explain, like, you were making your child's behavior mean something about you as a parent.
Yeah.
And so when it's good, then you're like, you feel really good. But when it's
Yes.
bad, you're like, wait a second, this means I'm a bad mom. And that's called personalization. We do that in lots of areas in our life, but specifically in parenting, it can really be so damaging because then we can really hold all this negative emotion inside of ourselves because we're like, oh, my child's always, throwing tantrums when we go to the grocery store, or my teenager's always talking back and I don't know what to do about it. Like, and this must mean that I've done something wrong. And it never means something about us, like at least 99% of the time, right?
Yeah.
Almost always it's that our child is just struggling, or maybe that they haven't learned self-regulation yet. Like maybe we haven't modeled that to them. Maybe they do have some sort of a diagnosis that we don't know about. Maybe they're struggling at school and we don't even know what's going on there. Like
Mhm.
there's always a reason behind a kid's behavior. I believe that kids are always doing the best they can, always. And
Yeah.
so if we come to the table believing that, then we interact with them in a totally different way than if we're just like, you're disrespecting me. That's like probably the most common phrase I hear. How can you help me get my child to start respecting me? Right? Instead of like, my child is just having a hard time. They're not going out
Yeah.
of their way to try to be disrespectful. They're not doing this on purpose. Even if it really feels true to you that they are, there is some reason that they're acting this way.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I love what you said about the parent modeling the calming behavior
Mhm.
themselves, because definitely when you get into that moment with your child and you're yelling back, you're not
Yep.
modeling any kind of regulation at all. You're
No.
activated too. You're like on their level,
Yeah,
right?
you're like, stop yelling as you
Yes,
yell at them,
yes.
right? And then it just like amplifies everything, which is normal.
Yes.
That's what our brains want to do. Our brains want to go to mirroring somebody else's emotion, or some people call it matching emotion, but we
Yeah.
match that kind of level of intensity. And I recently heard that the person with the strongest momentum behind their emotion will be the emotion that kind of gets taken on, right? So if you have this kid, whatever the age, I mean, everyone has tantrums, even adults, but if you have a child who is melting down and you come in there and you're kind of chill and calm before that, it's not going to take much for you to get agitated and worked up and get up to their level. So it is really deeply hard inner work to get to the point where you can sit there and you can take your deep breaths and you can calm your soul down so that you can handle that. I feel like it's making room, this like huge container for them so that they can explode in whatever, emotions they need to, because they do need to release that frustration. That has to happen. And so for them to release that frustration and us be the safe container where we're like, okay, you're safe, you're here, it's okay. And obviously we want to make sure they're safe and that there's not anything like dangerous around or happening. But at the same time, we want to keep our calm presence, there, so that that can help them. And it doesn't mean that they're going to immediately decrease. Like some people are like, it's not working, I tried that. And I'm like, yeah, sometimes it literally takes hours. When my toddler, I mean, she's 5, I don't know if that counts as a toddler anymore. When she goes into her moods, it sometimes will be 2 hours. And obviously that's not ideal. And we're like, well, I don't
Yeah.
want to do this for so long. But having her know, like, mom's still here, she still loves me, my emotions are okay,
Mm,
all of me is accepted, like
mhm.
even these strong emotions,
Yeah.
like nothing's gone wrong here. Eventually she will calm down, and
Mhm.
that, being able to maintain that, will really help our relationship because she'll believe those things. Whereas if I had freaked out the whole time,
Yeah.
she would have been like, okay, so anger's bad, my emotions are not okay,
Yeah.
I'm not accepted, this is not a safe space for me to share my feelings. And
Yeah.
we want our homes to be that safe space more than anywhere else.
Right. Do you have an example of that? How that lasted for 2 hours? Like what was going on?
Yeah, there's always like, it's funny because it's usually just something really little. So
Okay.
like, I'll use an example from yesterday. This happens frequently. Yesterday, she heard somebody say the word chips. She heard that there was chips. She heard that the chips happened while she was not there and that they're now gone.
Ah,
So she flies into her room screaming and yelling and just so upset.
mhm.
So I go in there and I, chat with her for a little bit. You don't ever want to have like, I mean, when you're in your emotional brain, you're low on logic, right? So there's no
Mm,
reasoning happening during this time.
yeah.
Also
And
no
how do people
distracting.
know when they're in their emotional brain?
Yes.
How do you teach them?
Yeah. So if they're in their emotional brain, I use what's called like the zones. Like it's kind of
Mm,
like red light, green light, yellow light. Like when in my mind, I'm like, okay, if she's totally exploded in red, like I know what her red zone looks like. I know what my
mhm,
red zone looks like too. So if anybody's in their red zone, you don't want to be like reacting from that. You don't want to be speaking from that. So I'm
mhm,
going to try to stay calm while she's
mhm.
freaking out in her red zone. I'm not going to try to like talk her out of her feelings and be like, you shouldn't be feeling this way. If it's a little bit less intense, if
Oh,
she's a little bit more yellow, I'll actually process her emotions with her. I'll say, okay, tell me what color, where do you feel it? Where is it in your body? And she'll
mhm,
usually say like,
yeah.
oh, it's black and it's heavy and it's right here. And like, as we just sit there and I ask her a couple questions, just every minute or so, she'll be able to process that feeling.
Mhm,
When somebody's in their red, this doesn't work so well because
mhm.
they're just really intense. So a lot of people just try to distract. They're like, let's just talk about something else. Here's a
Oh,
cookie, like, but that's not helping them release their frustration. So usually we're in her room. Usually she wants to be in her room. And usually she just wants to scream and yell. And I'm like, okay, let's just sit here and scream and yell. And when it seems like she's kind of calmed down a little bit, maybe I'll try to go and hug her or snuggle her or
mm,
sit beside
mhm.
her. And like yesterday, that did not work. She started screaming again. She was like, no, 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 there's more here. And for me, I'm thinking, okay, wait, there's just more she needs to release, right? This wasn't easy. She would sometimes start hitting and I'd be like, okay, you can totally be mad, but we don't hit when we're mad, right? We can hit pillows. We can hit. She's like, no, but I want to hit a person. I'm like, I know you do. That's what it always feels like when you feel this way, but we still don't hit people. And so you can say something calm, like, I'm going to have to leave the room if you keep hitting me, but you don't have to say like, okay, you're a bad person or like, I don't know, shame them for that because of course they feel that way, right? They're 5 and they're mad. And to them, it's
Yeah,
this huge deal. And
yeah.
so that whole process took a while, but eventually she got to the point where she wanted to snuggle. And I've actually asked her before, like, what feels good when you're feeling that angry, mad way? Like, what do you want? And she said, I want to go in my room, slam the door, and scream really loud. And then I want you to come and snuggle me. And so it was interesting that
Aw,
she already knew, like she knew what she needed
she
in that
knew.
moment.
Yeah.
So for me just to be like, okay, wait, that's fine. Like she's just going to scream and it's not a
Yeah.
problem because our
Yeah.
brains are like, wait, this isn't okay. And that comes from how we were parented. Because typically, when we screamed, yelled, cried, had any intense emotion, our parents were like, go to your room,
Yeah.
or you're grounded, or, we'll take away your favorite toy, or any of those things.
Yeah.
And what we're
Control
teaching
it.
them, yeah, is
You
that
don't
like
act like
that
that.
emotion is bad or wrong,
Yeah, that's
which
not
it's
what we
not.
want to teach our children for sure.
Yeah.
These people who are listening now are learning all finally now about like how we don't we need to repress emotions and how
Yes.
feeling the emotions and allowing the emotions is a good thing.
It is. It's the reaction to the emotion. We look at that and we're like, oh, the emotion's bad. It's not. It's how
No.
we react. If we respond in a
Yeah.
way that's like, we're just, breathing through it and we're feeling our feelings and whatever that looks like, but we're not harming somebody else, like it's totally fine. Obviously,
Yeah.
we aren't going to just go punch everybody when we're mad as adults or as kids.
Yeah.
Um, but I often see people be like, there's something wrong with my child. They, hit and kick and yell and bite when they're mad. I'm like, who doesn't feel that way when they're mad? Like that
Yeah.
is what it feels like inside. And when you're little, they're not supposed to self-regulate.
Mhm.
It's called co-regulation, and co-regulation happens with an adult that you're connected to, being able to hold that space for you and model that calm behavior so that over time you can learn self-regulation. And people often think that this happens a lot younger than it does. From what
Mhm.
I've read and researched, it's usually around 12 when self-regulation starts to happen. And it's not until
Mhm.
like adulthood that we can actually fully self-regulate. right? Our brains aren't fully
Wow.
developed into like our 20s, sometimes even our
Yeah.
early 30s. So that self-regulation process is really a process. It's learning. And when we come and say like, well, my 5-year-old or my 11-year-old or even my 14-year-old freaks out and they shouldn't be doing that anymore. They should know the skills. Then instead, I'm going to look back inside and be like, okay, why don't they know those skills? Is it just that my expectations are too high? Is it that maybe I haven't taught this skill yet?
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, I could talk
Yeah.
about this for days.
I
Obviously, I'm like
love
here
that.
spewing all this information at you, but
Well, I think it is so relevant. And one question that I think the listeners might have is about, they're working on their own regulation. And that is a struggle, like, right? Like, I think
yeah,
you said something like, this is deep work. Like, this is hard. It's not
yeah,
something that just, I think sometimes we expect it to be like, oh, this should be easy. Now that I
yes,
know how to handle it, like, I should just be able to do that. And so maybe struggling with pain, they're already working on their own
mhm,
self-regulation. And then I don't know exactly what my question is, but so they might be now noticing that this, might help with their parenting, and that if they're
yeah.
not doing it, that might be negative towards their parenting. What would you
Right.
say
Like,
about
I think
that?
what you're talking about is like when we learn amazing tools and we're like, these are so great, we often start to weaponize them, which means like we
Weaponize
use them
them.
against ourselves,
Yes,
right? We're
we
like, let's
do.
take this hammer that we could use to build a house, but instead of building a house, we're going to hit ourselves in the head with it.
Yeah,
And we do
yeah,
that
we
through
do.
taking it and being like, but we should be responding perfectly every time. No, no, you have a human brain. You were literally not going to respond perfectly every time. Um,
Hmm.
so one of my main soapboxes that I'm usually on is the more that we can feel compassion and grace for ourselves, the more easily it will flow out from us to others. So
Yes.
if we're thinking, I'm not doing the work enough and this isn't working and like I shouldn't have yelled and I shouldn't have freaked out. No, it's totally fine that you did. We all do that sometimes. And loving and accepting yourself will then help you that to the next time that this happens and your child is freaking out to be like, okay, I know that you're just having a hard time, right? Like just like I was
Ah,
having a hard time. So
oh my gosh, that's so important.
yeah,
Can you just say that one more time about that compassion for yourself?
yes.
Like, so, so many times I coach people and they've just yelled at their kids and they feel
Yeah.
horrible. And
Mhm.
so you're saying, don't beat yourself up over that.
Don't. Yes, right?
Yes.
It's like saying, okay, I want to lose weight, so I'm going to go to the gym every day, but I'm going to bring a person that's going to scream and yell at me and tell me what a bad job I'm doing because I'm not going fast enough. And because
Hmm.
I went to yoga instead of like going to a spin class and that's like not
Hmm.
as cool or whatever. Right. And you're just like, we're just going to bring this person around and be like, you shouldn't eat that. You shouldn't be
Yeah.
doing that. What are you doing? And
Yeah.
then like hope that that helps us lose weight
Yeah.
sustainably. Right. That never works. Like
That
no
does not
amount of
work.
beating yourself up will ever lead to sustainable change.
Okay. Yeah.
So when it comes to parenting, what this looks like is the I'm a terrible mom. The I'm a terrible mom is like, no matter what you do, like, I mean, you could feed your kids ramen noodles or cereal for dinner, or you could yell at them, or you could forget to pick them up after school. And then you're like, oh, I'm a terrible mom. And this puts you in this shame spin cycle. It's like a wash cycle. It's like constantly spinning. What happens is you feel intense shame. And then the kind of parenting that comes from that is either withdrawing and disconnecting or overreacting even more, yelling, screaming, being more short, not with only them, but other people. And
Oh, yeah.
as any time that we're feeling shame, the actions that are going to come through that, if we're reacting and not processing it, is that we're going to feel even more shame. We're going to do things that add to that shame.
Yes.
And the antidote to shame is self-compassion.
Yes.
So I think of it as like, it's like a glass. There's like 5 glasses that are empty. And
Mhm.
then there's one glass on top of that 5 glasses. And we're pouring water into the top glass and it's pouring and spilling out into these other glasses. So we're the top glass. And as we pour self-compassion into ourselves, it
Mm.
naturally spills out from us. But
Mhm.
if we only pour like a tiny little bit, or if we pour into the glasses below us, it's going to be a lot harder. It's
Yeah.
like the easiest way to fill all of those cups is just to like keep pouring in the top one.
Mhm.
And that's how I imagine self-compassion and parenting is
Mhm.
the more that I can practice that loving and grace and compassion for me personally, no matter how I'm showing up as a mom, the more that I believe I am doing a great job, I'm great at this, then the more we'll see those actions come out. Or like in our parenting, it'll be easier for us to feel compassion for our children and anybody around us. If you're not a parent, this works for everyone.
Yeah. Well, and it's exactly the same thing that we teach with pain. Instead of focusing on the pain and not wanting pain, you focus on the times you have joy and the times that feel good and the parts of your body that feel good and the breath and the, and the more you notice those good things, the more of them you see and the more there are. And it's just our thoughts creating our results. It is
exactly. I think that that is so what I teach in parenting, because often parents come and they're just like, my kid does this, 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 and this, and they list like 100 negative things.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, well, maybe not 100, but a lot. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's tell me the good. And like, it takes them a while to get there, but eventually they're like, I just had this happen yesterday, actually, to a client. And she's like, well, he really is kind and he really is helpful. And like, by the end, she was like, he's actually kind of awesome. And I was like, yeah, he is, isn't he? But when we focus on all of the things that they're not doing, all of the ways that they're not, living up to what we hope that they would, then we don't allow ourselves to even see, we're not obviously not doing this on purpose, but we don't allow our subconscious to look for all of the things that they're doing that are amazing. And then we miss out on all of those parenting years that we want to be enjoying. And no, you don't have to enjoy everything all of the time, but we don't want to be focusing so much on the negative, because that just amplifies it. That amplifies our frustration towards parenting, towards our kids.
Yeah.
It's just focusing on the wrong things.
Why do you think people do that? What are the main things that you hear, the reasons that parents do
why
that?
they do it?
Yeah.
I think that they do it because they think their kids are the problem. And then as soon as they feel that way, then they're looking out for problems. If we have this story of like, my kid's a problem, our brain's going to be like, okay, let's look for why that's true.
Yeah.
And so our brain's going to immediately look for evidence of why that story is true. I think deeper than that, it's that our brain has a negativity bias. So it feeds us more negative thoughts than positive thoughts. It's always looking out for danger. So it's like, maybe this situation is a problem, right? And so we just have to calm our brain down. Like if there's nobody in the world that's not doing their own inner intentional work, that's able to live in this way. Like you need to be processing your emotion and processing your thoughts and reconnecting. So for instance, I tell people like 30% of the time we're going to get it so that you can like do it pretty well. 30% of the time you're going to mess up, and 30% of the time you're going to spend like apologizing and reconnecting.
I love that. It's so good for me to hear, like, cause I've thought that too. Like, what is the balance? You're obviously not going to do it 100%.
No, never.
30,
and
30, 30.
It is. And the reason why it's such a blessing is that you're teaching your kids how to process failure. So I had a client who said, I always thought anger was so bad. And I felt so much shame for my anger because my parents never got angry. They literally never once showed their anger. So then she grew up thinking like, okay, this must be a problem. There must be something wrong with me. Felt such intense anger or shame around her anger that then she would explode like in the opposite way. So we want to teach our children that all emotions are okay, that it's normal as humans to lose it sometimes. We all do. And what we can do to apologize and reconnect, like that is the natural cycle. And the more that we can model that, the more that we can instill that behavior in them.
Right. Yes. And all of those emotions, and especially like anger, I do hear that one a lot, where the opposite parents were very angry, or one parent was angry. And so then, it's hard to know, how do you have anger without it being this scary thing, So, and I'm sure with all of the other emotions as well, not just anger, but shame. And, the more that we are doing the work ourselves, and which, all of the people listening to my podcast are, because their body has brought them to that point where it's like, you have got to do this work.
You have to do it. Yeah.
You can't keep avoiding it. You can't keep neglecting your own feelings. And what a beautiful thing, because then you're modeling this to the next generation of people.
Exactly. And then we're raising these kids that like aren't spending decades healing themselves
Yeah.
emotionally. They have
Yeah.
the skills and they have the tools. And that really is my end goal, is like, I want to help the mom, because the mom really does shift the whole energy of the home. And as she models that behavior to her kids, they will learn this, even the behavior to her kids of being imperfect, of making mistakes, of
Right.
sometimes yelling, right? Like that's
Yes.
okay. And as we model that behavior and as we teach them those skills, then we're raising those emotionally intelligent and resilient little people that we want as they turn into adults.
Mhm.
So that's kind of my whole goal. And I really do believe that that intuition, that inner knowing that we have, also relates to parenting, that we don't need to be asking outside of ourselves for the answer. And
Mm.
I was coaching somebody else this week, and she was struggling with the situation with her child. And really, she dealt with it perfectly. She freaked out, but then afterwards, she was like, calmed down and reconnected and was like, you know what, I was feeling upset. And this is, what I was thinking and feeling. And how are you feeling? And it ended up being this great conversation that they had.
Yeah.
But she wanted to go back and reassess it. And she was like, okay, what could I have done? And I was like, well, let's figure that out. I'm not going to tell you the answer, but let's figure out what
Yeah.
your answer is. And as we uncovered it for her, she gave me 4 steps, and I called it her playbook. I'm like, that's your 4-step playbook. Like,
Mm.
you just came up with exactly what you would do in 4 steps the next time, so that the next time it happens, you can be like, okay, wait, this is the spot where I stop. I
Mhm.
take a few deep breaths and I notice and name what I'm feeling.
Mm.
Number 2, this is the spot where I notice the thoughts that are going on in my mind. I bring them to my
Mhm.
consciousness out of just, randomly subconscious thinking.
Yeah.
Number 3, this is where I just like don't react or respond
Yeah.
until I'm feeling more calm. And then number 4, then I'm going to respond. Like once I've gone through those,
Mhm.
right? And I just thought that's amazing
Yeah.
that she was able to uncover all those skills for herself. That shows that how much inner work she's done. But I really think that we can all uncover our own playbook, our own self-help book
Yes.
that is
Yes.
unique and individual to us,
Yes.
that will work for us. And it all comes like none of these ideas come from hating on ourselves. Like shame and judgment and being self-critical will 100% of the time keep you from knowing what your intuition is saying.
Yes.
You will never be able to tap into like, how should I deal with this situation
Yes.
with my child? Like
Yeah.
that, it won't come from that.
Yeah. And you can know by checking in with your body. This is what I teach, that
Mhm.
when you start feeling your body tense, you're like, oh, okay, I'm starting to feel angry. That access through the body can be such good awareness. I was going to ask you, what are your favorite tips to tell parents when they're in that, they're noticing, they're
Mhm.
labeling or whatever, but they're, how can they calm down? What are your favorite ones?
Yeah. So I think that the first step is awareness, is
Mhm.
noticing how you're feeling. How does this feel in my body? Like, what
Yeah.
am I like, just checking in with like what's really going on. So I usually say like, name it. Naming it is part of emotional literacy. We need to understand how we're feeling and give that feeling a name.
Mhm.
And most of us, I'm in a training program right now through Brene Brown, and she says that most adults only know like mad, sad, but glad, mad, sad, glad. Yeah, she's like 3. Right. And so being able to, you don't have to be right. Like just practice it. Like, what do I think this is? Is it
Mhm.
agitated, frustrated, defeated, discouraged, shame? Like there's so many emotions. And if you
Yeah.
struggle with that, go print off a feelings wheel or a
Yes.
feelings list, and
Mhm.
just start being aware of like, this is what I'm feeling in my body. This is how it feels. And that's what the name is. And as you understand how it feels in your body, it can be helpful to explain it. Like sometimes I describe it out loud to myself. Like it feels
Mhm.
like it's in my chest and it's heavy and it's dark and it's like, a ball shape or whatever you want to do to
Mhm.
kind of explain it.
Yep.
Um, and then just to allow it to be there. And it's interesting how much resistance we have. And it's usually the resistance of the emotion that we're feeling that's so uncomfortable.
Yes.
So as
Yes.
soon as we allow it, as soon as we're like, okay, I'm feeling agitated, that's okay. I'm
Mhm.
going to allow the feeling of agitation to be present in my body. As soon
Yes.
as I say that, I can immediately feel my shoulders relax. I can immediately feel just like, it's
Oh,
almost like my whole body like breathes a little sigh of relief.
like I can
And
allow it, and then you
yes,
just relax a little bit.
yeah. And oftentimes that's all I need to do. If
Yeah.
it's deeper emotion, I might need to do a little bit more of a process. But
Yeah.
just like I mentioned, like creating your own playbook, create your own playbook when it comes to these times too. So
Mhm.
I help my kids create this as well. So there's like a list that we have of like little kind of like icons that's like all the different things you can do when you're mad, right? So like
Ooh,
maybe it's
nice.
jumping on a trampoline or like listening to music or reading a book.
Yeah.
And so we came up with this list together. We had all these little images they could look at. We practiced them when they were in their happy mode, when they were feeling good. And
Oh,
then,
yeah.
because that helps you kind of retain that muscle memory of like, oh, I remember that this was something I liked. And eventually
Yeah.
they all kind of come up with their thing
Yeah.
that helps them. So they're going to go outside on the trampoline, or one of them likes to go like read a book in his room and close the door.
Yeah.
My daughter likes to, scream and yell and then snuggle. Like whatever their
Yes.
like little
Yeah.
cycle is, it helps
Yeah.
them uncover what helps them to regulate. We do the
Yes.
same thing as adults. Like literally you could
Yes.
just look up a list and be like, okay, is it nature? Is it taking deep breaths? Is it music? Is it
Mhm.
prayer? Is it meditation?
Yeah.
Whatever things feel good to you. And then just
Yes.
practice and try them and be willing to be wrong. Like you don't have to like come up with the one thing that works in every situation.
Yeah. Because part of it is the flexibility of knowing yourself and starting to have a bunch of tools in your tool belt
To
that you
use the next
can,
time you're feeling that way. And I
yeah.
was taking a emotional self-regulation class recently. I'm really into emotional regulation,
Yep.
especially because I work with so many moms and that's kind of our issue, dealing it with ourselves and dealing with it with our kids. And
Sure.
what she said was to make a hierarchy of emotion.
Uh-huh.
So for instance, let's take anger and let's figure out scale of 1 to 10. How does it feel at each number? So at 1, what does it feel like? At 2, at 5, at 7, at 10, what does it
Mhm.
feel like in my body? And then once you've
Mm.
done that hierarchy, okay, let's go to like a solution. What feels like it would be good at that time? At a 10, it's probably going to be like going and locking myself in a room and screaming really loud.
Yeah.
Whereas at a 7, maybe it looks like I can process that feeling. Maybe I can just sit there and I can take some deep breaths. Maybe at a 5, I can
Oh.
just do some thought journaling. Maybe at a 2,
Mhm.
it's just like allowing the emotion in for 30 seconds. Um, so I love that idea because it's
Yeah.
us coming up with our own. And I love the scale. I thought that that was just so great.
Yeah, I've never heard of it that way. And it makes so much sense that like anger is a scale and
Mhm.
um and that, yeah, knowing that when you're at that really that height, just maybe taking that break, walking away, and
Yes.
that's okay. That's how you're regulating in that moment.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
I love that idea of like allowing all of the emotion, because I think sometimes we're like, I don't know if you've thought this with regulation. Some people might think it means like you're just supposed to only feel one thing all the time. Like you're
Yeah.
just supposed to like be completely regulated all the time, this flat
Yeah.
line, like
Yeah.
stoic.
Yeah. I think that's called like apathy, is it? No, not
Yeah,
apathy. There's
yeah,
like a
right.
affect. That's what it is, where you
Yeah,
don't
no,
feel any negative or
yeah.
positive emotion. And I know somebody that has that regularly and they do
Uh-huh.
not enjoy that. They're like, it is the worst to not be able to feel happy, to not be able to laugh when I want to laugh because I don't feel anything. Like we have to feel it all. Like if we
Yes,
want to have this
all of
full
it.
life experience, like we need to accept both ends and we need to
Yeah.
accept that like self-regulation isn't like it's not like a perfect balance. It's not like you're going to be standing in the center of a teeter totter holding this like pressure and this resistance of like I'm not going on either end, like I'm just going to stand on this teeter totter in the center. It's
Yeah.
that sometimes you're going to go on one side on the teeter totter and sometimes you're going to go on the other side, and you know how to get back to either side. And even if it
Mhm.
takes a while, like
Yeah.
some days I just feel junky for the day, like that's
Yeah.
okay. That's what
Totally.
everybody does. And then the next day I might feel totally different. And
Yeah.
to know what feels good to me. Like yesterday, I was having one of the down days and I'm like writing down, like, what do I think would feel good? And it was like
Mhm.
taking deep breaths, listening to music, and going
Mhm.
outside. And I was like,
Yeah.
I need those today. And
Yeah.
just allowing myself to go a little bit deeper than like what we think will make us feel better, which we use like our go-tos are usually like food or alcohol or scrolling social media or watching TV.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And
Mhm.
beyond that, we're like, I don't know what would make me feel better. So like I help people like, let's not just figure out the surface desire here. Let's like dig down to
Mhm.
what would really actually rejuvenate me.
Yeah. And do you find that people sometimes have resistance to trying to feel good more of the time?
I think most of the resistance I see is like, it takes too much time. Like, I
Oh,
don't have
yeah.
time for that. I'm a busy mom. I don't
Yeah.
have time. And I'm like, it takes like 60 seconds for one. So like,
Yeah.
yes, every person has time. There is nobody that doesn't have time
Mm.
because it doesn't have to be long. It can be
Mhm.
woven throughout your day. And like
Yes.
number two, the whole mom guilt of like, but I shouldn't spend time and money on myself.
Mhm.
That's actually false. You'll actually, the worst parenting comes from that because it leads to burnout and overwhelm and
Yes.
stress.
Yeah.
Whereas if your cup is full, then you're going to pour out to everyone else, right? Like if you're
Yes.
filling
Goes
your
back
cup
to
with
that.
what you're passionate about and taking care of yourself, it'll be so much more simple and easy to take care of the
Mhm.
people around you. It won't seem like such a struggle.
And it's great if if you're working on this stuff, if you have pain, because this is the exact same kind of thing we're working on, and just knowing that that's going to be helping with your parenting too, and that,
Yeah.
all of these things tie together. And as you're, just learning this regulation, being compassionate with yourself, allowing the lows and the highs,
Mhm.
all of these things, if you are a parent, that's the best kind of parenting, because you're modeling that for your kids, and you're, you
Yeah, I
know,
spend way less time. Like people come into my program thinking like there she's going to give me parenting tips. And I'm like, no, this is not about parenting tips. Like this is about let's figure out how to take care of you
yeah,
and look inwards. And so, yeah, like what you said, like meditation or taking a bath or going for a walk or journaling, like you're like, but that's not related to parenting. Yeah, 100% it is. It's related to anything you're doing in your life. And if you are going to come to whatever you're doing to work to parenting in a totally different energy, it will completely change how you show up in the world.
yeah,
Um, so it might not seem connected, but it actually is the most connected. It's the best
yeah.
work you can do in order to change your parenting.
Amazing. Yeah. And it's just so counterintuitive sometimes to think that, when you want your kids to change, that you work on your own change first.
Yes.
But
Yeah. Our brains are really resistant to that idea,
yeah.
but it really is that like as we work on us, our parenting is going to change.
Well, I think it's really fascinating. There's obviously, a lot of thought you've put into it, your own, experiences, I'm sure. It sounds really beautiful. I'm sure it's like messy and,
Yeah.
chaotic half the time, and beautiful
Yeah.
and loving half the time. But it just
Does.
sounds like, such a connected and, kind of resonant way to apply this work in parenting. And, for the people doing this work with their chronic pain, it sounds like it would go right along. And for anyone
Yeah.
that has kind of more questions for you, how do you work with people? And could you give us a little information about that?
Yeah, sure. I love Instagram. I
Mhm.
really love it, like a lot. So come find me there.
Yeah.
I'm the dot parenting dot coach
Okay.
on Instagram. I love to do Instagram lives and I love to answer people's questions. And I also really love my podcast. So my podcast is called the Freedom Moms Podcast. You can come listen to Betsy over there.
I was going to say there's a really good episode coming up.
There's a really good episode. So come hang out with me over there too. My podcast is great. I have a monthly program for moms where we combine this radical connection and all of the inner work and the life coaching tools. It's great. I could talk about it for a long time, but and then I also coach one-on-one. Depending on when this airs, I may or may not have spots open, but right now I'm currently taking one-on-one clients as well. And that could be either for you or you and your partner. I really
Oh,
love working with couples and with them to help achieve their parenting goals. So yeah,
do they meet
that's what I do.
together? How does that work? Do they meet
Yes,
together?
yeah,
Yeah.
they meet together. Yeah, so
Okay.
all three of us meet on Zoom and we do all the same work together. And it's
Mhm.
especially helpful for parents that they're both struggling with this. They're like, yeah, I kind of know there's a different way to do it. I don't really know how to do that. You don't have to
Mhm.
know about this parenting technique first. Like I said, it's very intuitive once you kind of get it flowing.
Yeah.
And I love it. I love working with dads. Actually, in my monthly program for moms, couples can attend once a
Oh,
month to
nice.
one of the coaching calls. So I actually do coach a lot of spouses on those calls. So yeah, it's
Oh,
been
that's
really
very
fun.
good. Because I would
Mhm.
imagine a lot of parents have different parenting styles, and
Yes,
all that comes up when you have a child that tests those
for sure.
boundaries.
For sure.
Yeah.
So it's really helpful. Yeah.
Good. Well, we'll have all of the links in the show notes so that you can check out Crystal and her work. Such important work. It's so great because, when people can learn those skills with regulation, with parenting, it's not only going to help them, but the next generation.
Yes. Yes. I always tell people you're like breaking the generational parenting cycle by doing your own work. So even though your own work seems really hard, how worth it is for you to change that cycle so that your kids, your grandkids, your great grandkids will be set up in a completely different way.
That is beautiful. Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening. I hope you learned a little bit about your brain today that helps you in your life like it helped me. Please be sure and subscribe and leave a review. And of course, be sure and share this podcast with someone you know that wants an unstoppable body and mind.